Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today to talk I'm going to be talking all about the J-1 research visa. I'm excited to share some information with you today. So just a typical standard disclaimer here, usual lawyer stuff, but this presentation is general information. It's not legal advice, and don't rely on this. You really do need specific advice to your situation. But I'm hoping that it's some good general info and kind of sharing some new things with you today. So who am I? I am Fiona McEntee. I am an immigration attorney, and I'm the managing attorney of McEntee Law Group. We're based in Chicago, but we have clients all throughout the US. I have been working as an immigration lawyer for close to 17 years. I do a lot of work with international students, with startups, with companies, and I'm really passionate about advocating for policy changes and about educating people on their options. I've also written a couple of books. One that's probably relevant here is about immigration options for startups. This is me. Here is a brief overview of how we're gonna kind of tackle this option today. So we're going to start with defining some terms. I think it's always important, especially in immigration, where there's a lot of acronyms and different terminologies, that we kind of define them from the outset. And then I'm going to talk about, J-1 visas in general, and then specifically about the J-1 research visa, talking about host companies who, might, as a visa applicant, might want to consider applying for this. What is research? Because it's the J-1 research visa. Well, what does research mean in the context of this visa? Some highlights of this program, steps in the process, J-1 visa interviews, and a couple of little FAQs here, and then hopefully time for some questions, but we'll see. So what is a J-1 visa? Well, it's a non-immigrant, meaning a temporary visa that is issued to people who are participating in an exchange program. And as we'll see later on, there's various different types of J-1s. I personally came to the US on a J-1 visa as a student. So I have that experience of being a J-1 visa holder and also an F-1 student visa holder. And the exchange visitor program is overseen by the State Department. And the idea is that it's this exchange, right? So you're coming to the US, you're learning, you're furthering your knowledge. There's a cultural component as well. And then you're going back and kind of bringing that with you to your home country. I'm from Ireland, and a lot of Irish people participate in various different J-1 visas, and it has kind of become a real crux of the Irish US experience, and I know a lot of other people from different countries feel the same way. So today we're going to be talking a lot about STEM, different STEM categories, and likely people have heard or know this term, but it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and it's people who are studying or working in these disciplines. So the J-1 Research Scholar is a category of J-1 visas that allow people to come to the US to conduct research, and we'll get into the definition of what that means later on. So there are various parties involved in a J-1 visa, and one group entity is this program sponsor. So it's an organization or an institution that has a designation from the State Department who can kind of basically issue documentation and kind of facilitate this J-1 program. So you have to go through a J-1 sponsor in order to get a J-1. So they're kind of the gatekeepers to the J-1 program. The host organization is your employer, where you will be working from. Sometimes the host organization can also be the program sponsor, but often, especially if it's a smaller company, you're going to work with an existing J-1 agency or J-1 program sponsor, and then you'll have a separate host organization or employer. The DS 2019 is the form that the sponsor will issue, which will ultimately enable you to apply for your J-1 visa. Typically, this is done through an embassy, or a consulate if you're overseas. Okay, so what is a J-1 visa? It's this temporary visa for exchange visitors. I just think it's important when we think about the J-1 visa just to be aware of how many different types of J-1 visas there are. So you can kind of see this here. I tell people this is used from anything, from people like an au pair, to an intern, to physicians, right? So foreign doctors come here on J-1 visas, interns, trainees, teachers, lots of different types. And for purposes of today, we're going to be talking about the J-1 Research Scholar visa. So why are we talking about this now? And, what happened that is what changed really, right? And there have been some changes, and this is why I wanted to specifically talk about this option today. So the Biden-Harris administration has really made a conscious effort to look at the existing pathways that are, already here, so in existence already, and to try to see, can they update the policy? Can they create new guidance that would make these options more accessible to people who are specifically in STEM or critical and emerging technology fields? So AI, climate research, things like that, right? How can we bring or retain more of these immigrants in the US? And one of the things that they did was they created this Early STEM Research Initiative program. So to be clear, right, the J-1 Research Scholar has existed for quite a while. So this has been around for a long time, but it has traditionally been used in more, I would say, stereotypical kind of research settings, like universities, hospitals, or labs, for example, right? So that's how the research visa was used, as imagine someone in a lab with a coat on, a scientist doing that type of research. That's how it's been used before. And this Biden-Harris administration initiative has kind of expanded this, created a subcategory of this for the J-1 early career STEM researchers, right? It's a mouthful, as a lot of things in immigration, but it's just think of it like a sub part of the existing J-1 Research Scholar visa. And you can kind of see the term scholar, was kind of, it evokes more of a maybe academic type practice. But the idea is that they want this to be expanded to other types of companies, and we'll kind of show you some examples of those. So this is why we're talking about this. It has been an expanded effort by the Biden-Harris administration to get more people to utilize this option. A couple of things to note. As I mentioned, there's this idea of the host company. So this is really who's going to be your employer. And the DOS, is the Department of State, encourages host companies, basically this collaborative effort, but to have this common goal in research, economic development, and exchange. Okay, so the host companies must be STEM focused, but they do not have to have a separate research division. There is also no requirement in relation to the size of the company. So it could be accessible to smaller companies and perhaps startups, which I think is fantastic to note. So there's no specific number of employees that is required. Although, I would imagine it would be difficult to get this approved for, a 1 or 2 person kind of operation. But we could talk to you about that and see. But there is no requirement of any number of employees. Now the company does, or the individual on the J-1 needs health insurance that is going to meet State Department requirements. This is for any J-1, and typically that would be provided by the host company. We work with, quite a few different J-1 sponsoring organizations, one of which is the American Immigration Council, and they have specific insurance that the host company can purchase through them that meets the State Department requirements. So there is a requirement there in relation to the insurance. So who are we talking about applying for this? Are we talking about PhDs, scientists, that type of thing? Guidance has said that no, you do not have to have a PhD in order to apply for this. And the State Department is saying that a bachelor's degree would likely be the minimum requirement for this. But it is not written in the regulations, right? But this is just guidance from the American Immigration Council. So the J-1 agency are saying likely you would need to have a bachelor's degree in a STEM field. Ideally, I would imagine, if you're going for one of these J-1 STEM, early STEM, visas. And the position should be basic or applied research. So, thinking about this, we'll get into more examples of research, but if you have a bachelor's degree in a STEM field, you might want to put this on your radar as a potential option for you. So what is research? Okay, so, I mentioned before that the host company does not have to have a separate physical space devoted to research, like a lab or even a separate research division. The State Department has confirmed that the research must align with your area of study. It can include proprietary applied research. The research should really support and further the company's mission and commercial objectives. Now, I thought this was great guidance that it should be framed around doing research, gaining knowledge, but that can be the case even if it is product or profit orientated, which is great. And so it means thinking of like a startup, somebody, if you're doing research in AI, ed tech, med tech, lots of different types of industries, I would imagine you would be able to utilize this research visa. The company does need to be STEM focused. And the example that they gave was that a restaurant cannot be a host to an environmental scientist researching green energy solutions. That's kind of a mismatch there. And then the host company is not STEM focused. They have said, basically host companies that have business activities that are relying on STEM professionals, and the STEM research should be related to the business activity that they do. So that seems pretty straightforward, I think, in terms of you can't be doing research for a non-STEM company that doesn't relate to their mission. So some good guidance there in relation to research. Okay, so important, this is some good info here. The reason I'm so excited about this visa is that it can be issued for up to 5 years in duration, which is phenomenal. That is longer than almost all other visa options that I can think about, and certainly than a lot of the other J1s that we would consider. So often the J1s that we would look at would be maybe an intern visa, which is 12 months max, or even the trainee, which is 18 months, right? And this is up to 5 years, which is just phenomenal. And then also another great thing to note is that there's no annual cap or limit on the number of J1 research visas that can be issued in each year. So those who have kind of looked into some immigration options before have probably heard about the H-1B visa, and there's the H-1B visa lottery, because there's a limit on the amount of visas that can be issued, new visas per year. So there's this supply and demand issue, which creates this lottery. You wouldn't see that in the J1 research visa because there's no cap on the number of these that can be issued per year. I do want to mention, though, there's this thing called a 2-year home residency requirement. So this can apply if your J1 has been funded by government, either US or your home country's government funding, or if your country's on what's known as the skills list, you may be subject to this 2-year home residency requirement. And what that means is this is the determination that is made when you're applying for the visa at the embassy. If you're subject to this, you can be limited in getting a H-1B visa afterwards, or in getting a green card. You will either have to return home for 2 years, hence the 2-year home residency, hence that term, or get a waiver of the requirement. Now, it's not going to apply to everybody. There's a skills list, and you can see the actual skills that are on the list and also the countries that are on the skills list. So, Ireland not on the list, so unless you're getting funding, I'm saying Ireland because that's where I'm from. I work with a lot of J1 or would-be J1 visa holders from Ireland. So just mentioning that, but there is a list where you can look up and see. And you won't know for definite until you go into the embassy, but you can get a good idea of this. Now, even if you are subject to the 2-year home residency, it could still be a really good option for you, notwithstanding that, because it's up to 5 years. So it's a long time to be able to come to the US and work. So how does this all work, right? So the first thing is we need this J-1 program sponsor. As mentioned, we work with the American Immigration Council. So how this happens, the steps that I take is our clients will come to us for an assessment of what visas might work for a prospective employee, right? Let's say they have a developer who's outside the US and they want to bring them into the US. We'll do an assessment of all immigration options, and the J-1 research visa might be one of the options that we would suggest. So we would get an idea of maybe a job description, making sure that it is research, based, that they're a STEM professional, that they have the bachelor's degree, some information on the host company and what they do. And then we'll liaise with a program sponsor. I'll use American Immigration Council here as an example. So we will give them, this proposed job description and all the other info I mentioned, and ask them if they think it's a good fit for the J-1 research, visa. And if they say yes, then we'll work with them, and they will, we'll provide them whatever documentation they need. They will work on completing this DS 2019 form. There's some financial documentation that they need, because we need to show that the individual is going to be able to support themselves in the US. So that can come from, income, like proposed wages from the host company and so on and so forth. So basically working with the J-1 agency to try to get all this documentation together. An estimate of living expenses, the health insurance, pay the application fees. That's typically how it goes. Once that's all done, or in the course of this, the agency will do an interview with the applicant. So they will interview the applicant and make sure that everything, matches up. They'll ask them some questions and make sure that, they are coming in to act in, a position that involves research and so on and so forth. I think this is on a slide later, but I'll just address it now. There is typically a requirement that the host company get a site visit to make sure that the J-1 visa holder is going to be in a situation that is, safe, and there's workers' compensation insurance required. So there's some other things that they just want to make sure that they're not put in a kind of, a vulnerable position. So they will typically, either depending on where people are located, they can either do an in-person site visit or through Zoom. And assuming everything checks out and they're satisfied with everything, they will issue this DS 2019. And then you can go ahead and schedule your visa interview, right? So you get your DS 2019, then you go to book your visa interview, and you have to prepare for this. So we'll prepare you, and the agency will probably prepare you as well, just for questions that you should anticipate. And we'll talk through the documentation that you need, and just evidence to show that you intend on returning home, because it is a temporary visa. Even if it is for up to 5 years, you still need to show that you're intending on returning home after the program. So these are the types of things that you will need. You need the DS 2019, your passport, financial documentation, your visa interview form, insurance documentation, things like that. And these are all parts of the, process. You'll pay a visa application fee in addition to the other fees that will have been paid earlier. And I can provide those later. Again, it depends on what agency you're working with and how long you're going to be in the US for. It also depends on whether you're getting insurance through the agency or not, or whether the host company has insurance that exceeds the State Department requirements. And then the wait times will vary depending on where you are. So, that's something that is kind of hard to predict early in advance, right? But depending on, obviously certain places have longer wait times than others. So okay, so some typical questions that we get. The last one I've already discussed is site visits. Are they required? I mentioned that yes, they are required, and sometimes they can do Zoom, site visits of the host employer. So can your host company sponsor you for a H-1B or for a green card? Well, the idea of this visa is that it is temporary, and a host company should not be looking to fill a long-term staffing need with somebody on a J-1 visa. Now, sometimes you can come in later and your intentions can change, and things can happen later on, but you should go into this program knowing that it is a temporary visa, and that you're not going to come in and immediately try to get a green card. That goes against the intent of the program, both from your point of view and also from the employer's point of view. So it is a temporary non-immigrant visa that requires that temporary intent. So can this be paid or unpaid? I mean, you do need to show that that the exchange visa, the J-1 visa holder, is going to be able to financially support themselves, plus having additional funds for emergency expenses. So, I mean, I can imagine a situation where somebody's going to be coming in on a researcher and from an employment point of view, that to be unpaid. I would imagine that would be, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I'm not sure if that would pass muster with the employment. There's a minimum wage and stuff like that. So in our experience, these are compensated positions, and people, we have to put down as well what the compensation is. So from my experience, it is typical for J-1 visa holders to be paid here in the US. So somebody's asking, is a J-1 visa possible for somebody who overstayed the ESTA visa waiver program and is currently enrolled in a STEM graduate program? So you would need some legal advice, definitely. If people have overstayed visa waiver program and are here in the US, there's probably going to be some issues there, right? If you're overstaying, you could be accruing unlawful presence, which would subject you potentially to a bar if you leave. So that is something that you would absolutely need to discuss. So someone's asking, can the individual on the J-1 have any ownership in the host company? Ooh, that's a great question. I haven't seen this come up directly, so and I'm trying to think of how this would be addressed, in like where this would come up proactively in terms of the documentation. I know that just from working with startups, it is pretty common for employees of startups to be given equity in the company. So we would see that actually from time to time with different visa options. I would say, we would kind of chat about it and see what percentage of what percentage of the company you own. If you're like a large majority owner of a US company, maybe the J-1 research scholar is not going to be your best fit. There might be a better option available that really would permit, company, or would be more suitable to a company owner. And if you have a smaller percentage and you're given, a small bit of equity, as is customary for other employees, well, then perhaps, that would be permissible. I would just kind of want to dig into this a little bit further, and I would want to present this perhaps to the J-1 sponsor just to get their take on it. Because ultimately, I, as much as I wish I would be, I'm not the adjudicator of these cases, either from the, the J-1 agency part or the embassy part. So there's we can help and we can prepare and we can issue spot and advise, but ultimately it goes to somebody other than us, right? First in the J-1 agency, and then ultimately to the embassy. Somebody saying you're currently in the US on a J-1 grad, so the J-1 grad visa, which is a variation of the J-1 intern visa. Is this still an option? So I don't think you can go from one J-1 to another, without some gap in between. So we would need to chat with you and see. I think this is, I guess it depends on your situation, right? And if you've already done the J-1 intern visa, then you kind of picked that J-1. Let's imagine you can only do one J-1 and you need to leave a gap in between, right? So for you, if you've already committed to that and are in that process, right, we would see how long you might need to be out of the US in order to come back in on this. the other, if you haven't yet committed to a J-1 visa, I might talk to you about putting this higher on the list than the J-1 graduate intern visa, perhaps, right? It just really depends on your potential employer. It depends on your background, to see whether this is a good fit for you. If it is a good fit, it might be a better fit than the grad visa. So it doesn't directly answer your question, but it's just food for thought for people who might be in a similar situation, but like earlier in the process. Would you recommend how researchers might find positions or employers that are open to hiring people on the J-1 visa? Many companies may not be familiar with the visa requirements and might be reluctant to invest the additional time and effort to hire a J-1 researcher. So, unfortunately, like we don't help with the securing an employer part of this process. So that is not something that we help with. I mean, on the other hand, we have companies who come to us all day long who are willing to hire somebody on, whatever visa is the most suitable for them. So I do find that the appetite is there. But as far as like what you can do to get a company to be willing to consider this for you, I would just encourage you to utilize all tools that are available to your disposal, right? So is that LinkedIn? Is that reaching out to your existing network? Is it, looking at maybe where you went to college, university, and seeing if there is, somebody from the alumni group in X, that type of thing is the stuff that you would do to network. But I find that companies do have an appetite to hire, foreign workers, especially if there's an option that I think can be quite accessible to them. And I think the immigration system can be intimidating, and it can be, for companies who've never done it before. But I do find that people are willing to do this for the right person. So you just need to, try to get your foot in the door and try to really, prove yourself and leverage whatever network and tools you have. So that's what I would recommend. I'm excited about this option. It is an expansion of an already, existing option, and just thinking about how to use this in different settings. I applaud the Biden-Harris administration's creativity when it comes to expanding policy to, enable us to bring some of these really talented STEM professionals into the US. I hope, more people can utilize this option, and I'm here to answer whatever questions you have. I think this is like a little known option, and I want more people to know about it. I think from someone who came to the US on a J-1, then on an F-1, I always just want to information share. I want to empower people to, take some kind of ownership over their immigration if they can, and to try to advocate for more immigrants and for employers to get access to these great options. Follow us all online, and hopefully everybody has a great day, and thank you for your time and for tuning in. Take care.